Okay, welcome to, this is number 19, and we are looking at bacteria. And so peptic ulcer, and so prior to 1982, this is kind of a cool story, and so you have stomach acid in your stomach, and so you have an acid in there which then helps break your food down. And so prior to 1982, people thought that peptic ulcers in your stomach were caused from the stomach acids. And so what this physician did, and his name was Marshall, and so Marshall started looking at, he was looking at biopsies taken from peptic ulcer patients. And so then he might stick a long tube, like an endoscope, down someone's throat, down into their stomach, and then he would take samples. And he kept finding a bacteria and that hadn't been seen before. And so this is a bacteria that can live in the stomach, and it's called Helicobacter. Helicobacter. And so helico is a helical shape, because remember sometimes they name bacteria by their shape, like bacillus is round, and helico is kind of like a helix, and so it's a shape. And so he kept finding these things, and then he was saying that it was the bacteria that were infecting the stomach. And so how did the bacteria get in there? You consume it, or they're naturally colonized there. And then if the conditions are right, then you can have that one bacteria turn into 2, 4, 8, etc., etc. And so you can consume those things. And then when the conditions are right, this Helicobacter starts to infect the stomach. And so if this is your throat going up here, and this is your your small intestines right here, and so it's infecting this place that has a lot of acid in there. And so then the bacteria then starts eating its way through these different spots on there, and actually makes an ulcer just like you get in your mouth. When you have an ulcer there, then the acid aggravates the ulcer and it makes you feel terrible. In an extreme example, you could actually get a hole that's all the way through there. So when you know someone that has a peptic ulcer, it's by this Helicobacter. And so what do these names actually mean? The names actually mean duodenum and jejunum and all that stuff. Those are different parts of the stomach. And so the stomach is made up of two different spots. And so that's what those names mean. And then the Helicobacter, that is the name of the bacteria. And then a guy named Dr. Marshall found it, and prior to 1982, they thought that it was only exclusively due to stomach acids. Pretty interesting, though. This guy, Dr. Marshall, he was doing biopsies, and he found this Helicobacter in there. He named it, and then nobody believed him. And so then what he ended up doing was he ate some of this bacteria, and then he came down with a stomach ulcer, and then he treated it with like penicillin or something, and the ulcer went away. So now we're treating peptic ulcers with something that kills bacteria. And so you can't just treat it with like Pepto-Bismol or something. So if you know anybody with a peptic ulcer, that's what it is. And so it's caused by bacteria. So then if we move downstream from the stomach and into the intestines, we can get inflammatory. Inflammatory means your body is reacting to something that is something that is invading your body. And so like you can have an inflammatory response when you suck in pollen in your nose. And so inflammatory is when your gut seems really, really big and inflamed, and so you can get it from a variety of things. And so some people get it from certain kinds of yeast, like in bread. Other people get it from bacteria. And then a third way you can get it is just the gut biome. The gut biome gets out of whack, and so you get all kinds of different bacteria living in your gut. And so if it gets out of whack, and you get more of one growing in it than another one, you can have an inflammatory response. And so then, if you have your guts like this, and then you have an inflammatory response, all of a sudden this gets swollen. This lining gets swollen, just like if your nose gets stopped up. That's an inflammatory response. When your guts start getting swollen like that, then it makes water absorption harder because you have all this junk you got to go through. And so it makes water absorption into the body harder, so then it gives you diarrhea. And so this little bacteria, it's not really one, it's usually a combination of like multiple things, environmental, immune, but your body doesn't like something that's in your gut, and so it gets inflamed. And so how would you get this, and how could you cure it so you don't have it again? Well, if you feel like your belly gets real taut, and then you're like, oh, I had white bread, maybe focus on your diet and what your diet is doing, because that can cause an inflammatory problem. And then stuff's not moving very well, and so then you can get an infection after that. You know, and so 3 things that can cause, let's say, environment, and then let's say that the bacteria gets out of whack, but it's an immune response. So what causes this inflammatory? It's an immune response to the environment or bacteria. So then the next one is exotoxin-derived diarrhea. And so some of the questions here is, why is diarrhea watery? What would it take so you wouldn't have to have it again? How do they connect to each other? I'm not sure of the last one, but an exotoxin is something that is secreted from a bacteria. So that's the first thing. So you have a bacteria, and then it's in its little environment, and so then it's going to secrete this exotoxin. Exotoxin. The exotoxin is merely just a protein, so it's a toxin. This is how poisons work too. And so this is an exotoxin, so it's secreted. And so the toxin is secreted, and let's say the toxin looks like this. Let's say the toxin looks like this. Over here. This guy. That's what the exotoxin looks like. And then, because our body has to regulate water, it's going to produce chemicals that tell the body to secrete or absorb water. And it might look like this. And this is what the body makes over here. So this says, you know, don't absorb water. Maybe your body's fully hydrated and it doesn't need any more. So if you have E. coli, which is a bacteria, and it produces an exotoxin right here. Another one is Vibrio. This is what is cholera. Cholera was really, really, really bad. So you pretty much diarrhea yourself to death. You die from it. But both of these cases, they produce an exotoxin from the bacteria cell. And then your body sees this as its own. And so then it says, don't absorb water. And so the water that you drink doesn't get absorbed, and it goes right out your back end. But then you become thirsty because you're dehydrated, but your body is reading this exotoxin, and so it still says don't absorb water. So then you keep pooping out water, and you become more dehydrated, and then you can never, ever satisfy that. And so what would it take so you wouldn't have to have it again? Don't eat stuff that has this exotoxin in it. And so sometimes this exotoxin can be absorbed all by itself. It's a chemical. And so how do they connect to each other? I'll just say that bacteria produces an exotoxin. So in this case, it's not the bacteria that's making you sick. It's the exotoxin that is secreted that makes you sick. And those are formed from two bacteria. There's multiple ones, but what secretes exotoxins to give one diarrhea? E. coli and Vibrio. Those are two examples of things that do. And so you're ingesting a chemical that looks like something of your own. So the next one on the list is acne. And so we've probably all had zits and things like that. And so how do you get acne? It is from a bacteria. And the bacteria gets in your pores. And so how do you get it? From bacteria. And then where would you get this type of thing from? It's just out there. And so how is acne caused? And so if you have your skin, so here's a pore and here's like a hair sticking out of it. And so you get this bacteria, we'll make it blue. The bacteria gets down in here. And then they can produce an exotoxin, or your body does that little inflammatory response. And so it gets red because it feels this thing is right here. And then you get an infection. And so then your body produces pus. And so then you start getting this pus stuff right here. And so when you have a white head or a black head, white head versus a black head. And so when you have a black head, this thing is open, and this guy gets a little, when it's exposed to air, it turns black. If it stays covered up, it stays white. So a blackhead is when it's open. Blackhead is when it's open and the melanin turns dark. And so everybody always wants to know, how do you treat these things? And so popping zits really doesn't work. And so that's all that's going to do is this is going to inflame all this, and it's probably going to make it worse. A better way to do it, and I'm no dermatologist, but what I used to do and what I do now is if you put a cotton ball with some alcohol on it, and then you put that cotton ball on top of this, it'll dry it out. It'll help clean this out a little bit. And then after that, put a cotton ball with like Neosporin on it, or some kind of antibacterial medication. And so how is it caused? You get bacteria down in there, it causes an inflammatory response. If it's open, it causes a blackhead. If it stays closed, then the melanin doesn't convert over to a dark color, and that's how it's caused. And then your body eventually fights it off. Don't pop the zits. Maybe use alcohol or soap, clean that off, and then maybe put a little dab of Neosporin on it. And then last, chicken pox. That's what those are, not bug bites. Those are chicken pox. And so chicken pox is caused by a virus, and that's the reason I put that in there. And so you can have these zits, which are caused by a bacteria, but you can also have pox, which is caused by a virus. And so the bacteria, remember, that can emit exotoxins and it can cause an inflammatory response. But the virus is actually killing the cells. And so the virus kills the cells. And so then as it starts killing the cells, then your body is trying to get rid of all these dead cells and all this stuff, and that's what causes the pox. And so one way you can get rid of these, they do not have a treatment. There's some treatments that you can do for chicken pox, but they don't have like something that goes in and kills the virus. And so you can get a vaccination where they put a dead virus in you. Your body learns to fight it off, so then when chickenpox comes in, it'll kick its butt. But viruses are so small and they're incorporated in your DNA that that's how chickenpox can reside in your cells and then come out when you're like 50. And so how does something irritate the skin? And so the virus gets in there, it starts killing the cells. And right at the end, right where you're, because remember you have all these specialized cells. You have different cells in your nose, on your tongue, and then out by your skin where your nerve endings are, and that's where the chickenpox likes to reside, is on nerve endings. Nerve endings. That's where chickenpox is, on your skin. And so then it starts irritating that. And so the only way to get rid of it is by vaccination, or your body just learns to fight it. But the chickenpox resides on the nerve endings and starts killing the cells, and that's how it irritates your skin.